Hi friends, Tony DeWitt here, Missouri appellate attorney and a guy who likes to make the law make sense on YouTube. Here's what we're discussing today. Today we're going to start with a story, and it's a true story. It does have the benefit of accurate historical information in it, at least that part of it that is not lost to memory. Now, when I was about 9 or 10 years old, my aunt lived about 2 houses down from my grandmother. And at the time, I was staying with my grandmother. My mom and my stepdad were over in Germany with the Air Force. And so I was staying with my grandmother, and we were all up at my Aunt Naomi's house doing something. My aunt used to make these things called Bismarcks, which basically they would take the dough that comes in the Pillsbury little canned biscuits, and they would fry them up and then sprinkle powdered sugar on them. And everybody thought those things were wonderful. And now when I think about that, I think, yuck. But that's just me. So these Bismarcks, I think, were in the process of being made, and I might have snitched one because even then I was a chow hound, okay? At any rate, it really set my aunt off, and she had a yardstick that she used to convince people not to do things that they know they shouldn't do in the first place. And she lit out after me with that, and I ran out the front door of her house, and she said, "You better not run." And I ran right down to my grandmother's house, ran in the front door, and locked the front door. My aunt came and knocked on that door, and I was just, ha, 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 you can't get to me. I locked the door. And as I was sitting there thinking about how brilliant I was, my Aunt Naomi came in the back door, and I'm pretty sure it was a lot worse for having done what I did by running away. But in those moments as a child, I learned that actions have consequences and that bad actions have bad consequences. This is a universal law. In fact, it's taught in physics. Here we have Newton's third law demonstrated. For every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. And in the case of the political world, where there is an action, there is an equal and opposite overreaction, but that's another story. And I mean no disrespect to my aunt, whom I loved dearly. But I thought it was an interesting way to start this video because there have been a lot of news stories about the protesters who have been suspended from the universities.
I'm being restricted from a lot of things right now that I didn't expect to be for standing up for something that I believe in. I have family coming in who I have to let them know to not come to my graduation ceremonies.
Knowing what you know now, like you said, you were standing up for a cause. Would you do it again?
I mean, yeah, I would. I was doing what I believed was right, and I still believe it to be right.
So obviously, she learned nothing. And now, because she's been suspended from Arizona State University, she can't walk at graduation. She's not going to be able to attend her finals, and as a result, she's not going to be able to graduate. And she had family members flying in on, of course, non-refundable tickets to see her graduate. So that sort of begs the question of why you wouldn't leave the protest after you were warned numerous times, A, that you were going to be arrested, and B, that you were going to be suspended if you violated the student code of conduct. I don't understand it. I really don't. Generally speaking, I am in favor of peaceful protest. I've put that out here before. If you want to stand around and hold a sign, you want to chant slogans, as long as you're not disturbing other people in the normal course of business, as long as the protest remains peaceful, I have no problem with that. If you want to protest in favor of animal rights, if you want to protest for climate change, if you want to protest that tiddlywinks ought to be included in the Olympics, I don't care. Protest all you want. Make all the signs you want. But where you cross that line from being a peaceful protester to being somebody who's breaking the law, you need to expect consequences. Now, in the South in the 1960s, they didn't really appreciate the right to protest, and people were hosed down with fire hoses, and A lot of them were thrown into jail without any kind of due process. It was a real mess. But the people who actually protested during the the Rosa Parks bus incident, they all humbly went to jail. They allowed the police to arrest them. They didn't resist. They allowed the police to take them to jail, and they served their time. And they did it as an act of civil disobedience because they felt that the law was wrong. And of course, we all recognize now that the law was wrong. At the time, there were a lot of people who, who didn't want the police to stop at putting them in jail, and that also was wrong. And of course, right now, there are a lot of people who don't want to see the protesters get off scot-free, even though in many cases they are getting off at least without criminal law consequences, because the administrations in the states have been much more tolerant of what they term acts of civil disobedience, but which the police termed violence. Now, one of the reasons that I point out this ASU student, and I think it is really telling here, ASU released a statement and they said, look, 20 times before the police raided this encampment, we told them, you're going to be subject to arrest for trespassing. And here's what ASU's statement after these arrests were made was. It says, our first priority is to create a safe and secure environment for all those on campus. This includes addressing the safety of individuals who come to campus to speak, listen, protest, and counter-protest. After all-day discussions about the need to remove the encampment, protesters, most of whom were not students, were told at least 20 times over loudspeakers that the encampment was an unlawful assembly and they had to dismantle and disperse or face arrest. People were also warned throughout the day of the potential legal, student conduct code, and academic consequences. The updated number for the currently enrolled ASU students arrested is 20, up from the initial report of 15. Students are also subject to the Student Code of Conduct, which applies regardless of whether they were arrested or are prosecuted. The idea that the people would get up there now and say, we had no idea we were going to be suspended from the university, and there's video out there. If you Google ASU student protesters can't graduate, you'll see some of that video. And it's absolutely ridiculous. And the media has done a pretty fair job of saying, hey, these guys were told. But I wonder about a generation that has been told forever that, actions don't have consequences, that people have been essentially hands-off parents. I think I am probably a better person today for having that interaction with my Aunt Naoma and understanding that, actions do have consequences than I would be if I had just been allowed to get away with that, because then I would think, wow, it really is possible to get away with some of this stuff. Let's do it again. Because that's how the human mind works. It's, what you encourage, you get more of, and what you discourage, generally speaking, you get less of. I think that is sometimes not a lesson that is well learned at these universities. And I find it terribly distressing that the professors would engage in protests that included violence and in protests that were unlawful. If the university had a rule that said you couldn't have an encampment and you put up an encampment and your professors joined you in that encampment, as far as I'm concerned, the professors should face discipline at the university for that. Now, a lot of these guys are tenured and they don't ever have to worry about being fired for any reason, except maybe morals clauses. But even then, I think a lot of times that gets swept under the rug. The bottom line is that, for the most part, the people who are doing the protesting are not innocent students. Now, there are innocent students in there. I wouldn't say innocent. There are gullible students in there. I saw a report today that essentially activists started training protesters 9 months ago to prepare for these student protests this spring. This is just a thought, but maybe they should have prepared them for the fact that there would be both legal and academic consequences for what they did. But of course, when you're an outside agitator and you are trying to foment trouble, You don't want to give them all the information, you just want to use them like marionettes. And that's essentially what happened here. I won't even get into the whole issue of whether or not the war in Israel, the war against Hamas, is a moral war or not. I think that's for scholars and academicians to debate in the future. I will tell you that I fully support wiping Hamas out completely as a political and military unit, because otherwise it will just come back. But again, I'm happy to have any opposing views. If you have a different view on that, please feel free to share it. Please remember to keep your comments something that a third grader could read, because sometimes children get on here and read things, and we should take care of them in that regard. So please keep your language clear and non-profane. Other than that, feel free to disagree all you want to. Thank you so much for being here. I appreciate you watching. And of course, if you have an opportunity today, do something kind for someone. And then come on back here tomorrow and catch me down at the beach, and we'll talk about something else that's interesting and fun. If you like this video, here are a few others you might try, and don't forget to subscribe. Have a terrific day, guys.